Okay, so before we get to today's topic, I wanted to let you know about the next community practice we've got scheduled for November 17th at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be with one of our leading voices in the community-led equity efforts to present, Divya Shadar, who's the manager of climate resiliency and sustainability at Cleveland Neighborhood Progress. And what she's going to be talking about is the energy burden and the distribution of tree cover in Cleveland, Ohio. It's also is like a sort of special treat for you all. We're going to be showing off our newest gem indicator, the urban tree canopy. So make sure to register, because Divya, I can say from even personal experience, is absolutely great. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Samantha and Kenneth.
All right, thank you, Daniel. Hey everyone, this is Kenneth Sercy. Thank you again for being here and for your work. We're excited to be talking with y'all today about the Inflation Reduction Act. It's an exciting piece of legislation, and we think that there's a lot of potential here to promote equity in our communities. And so we wanted to start off today by just highlighting a theme that we see when we've been reviewing the act and thinking about its impact, which is there's, like I said, tremendous potential for equity gains and other community benefits under the Inflation Reduction Act. Good opportunities for bill savings for residents and businesses, improved public health through better air quality, job creation, affordable transportation access, lots of other things as well. So lots of benefits could be realized under this new law. But it's also important to recognize that most of the funding, most of the incentives under the IRA really have to be proactively pursued. And so we're going to talk about a lot of programs that ultimately cities or CBOs or other entities will apply to and then be awarded grants or other types of incentives. So it's important to recognize the key role that community leaders and community members like y'all and like all of us have in ultimately realizing the potential benefits of the act. And of course, I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say this, but I think it's worth saying anyway. We're going to be most successful in bringing benefits to our communities when the community is the center of the planning and the implementation of what we're doing. And so that runs through our presentation here as well. So with that theme that you're going to hear from us, from Samantha and myself as we go, we're going to go through a number of the different programs and incentives that the IRA created. Not an exhaustive list, but we're going to hit a lot of the big stuff in the act. So with that, let's get into it. We can go on to the next slide. Okay. So first program to talk about here is all about clean energy plans. And so probably most of y'all are familiar that in recent years, cities all over the country have started to do energy and climate planning where they say, okay, by 2050, I want to be at 100% renewable energy. Or by 2050, I want to be at net zero CO2 emissions. And they've created plans to get there. And They're creating programs and policies that then enact the plans. So this program under the IRA, which gets $5 billion of funding, is all about creating those types of clean energy plans. So now cities can apply to this first pot of money that I'm showing, which is the 250 million, for funding to develop a plan. And then the second pot, which is most of this program, 4.75 billion, is for implementing the plan that they come up with. So let's say a city creates a plan and there's a lot of energy efficiency, that energy efficiency is emphasized in their plan, and maybe they have a program where they want to provide rebates for energy efficiency upgrades. They can apply under this program to get the funding for those rebates, and potentially they get hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to provide rebates. And this is about greenhouse gas reduction. So it's pretty broad. I mean, it could be renewable energy, energy efficiency, could be transportation related. So this is a neat program, and it's one that the eligible entities to apply to this one are cities, states, tribal governments, and air pollution control agencies. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And next program I'm going to talk about is an even bigger program funding wise, and it centers around green banks. So I wanted to talk a bit about what a green bank is, because I know some folks might be familiar with that term, others might not. So basically, a green bank provides loans for clean energy projects. So it's not there to make a profit for itself. It's a mission-driven institution. And it's there to fund clean energy projects that otherwise wouldn't happen. And so through loans, the bank provides funding to the project, develops, maybe it's an energy efficiency project, maybe it's rooftop solar, maybe it's some other type of clean energy project. But the bank provides the upfront funds, and then over time, the bank is paid back. And so as the loan is paid back for the project, the bank is replenishing its capital, and then is able to take that capital and loan it out to another project. So through that process, the money is continually being recycled, and that allows it to multiply the impact of this funding. So that's a green bank in a nutshell. So again, they generally provide loans. They're not grant making institutions. And the other thing I wanted to say is, while the mission tends to be focused on clean energy and fighting climate change, it can also be broader. You can have a dual mission of clean energy and serving low-income communities, or maybe another part of your mission is improving resilience. So however the green bank is created and the mission that it's given determines how it's going to function and what it's going to support. Okay, so with that introduction, we'll go to the next slide and talk about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. So this is 15 to 27 billion for disadvantaged communities, and 20 billion total is going to those green bank institutions. And so those are the first two bullets that I have here on this slide. So 8 billion is for investing in greenhouse gas reductions through green banks, specifically in low income and disadvantaged communities. And then another 12 billion is basically the same thing, investing in greenhouse gas reduction. That one is in communities generally. So it could be a low income or disadvantaged community, but it also could be just any community. And then there's a third bucket in this fund, which is 7 billion, which does not necessarily have to be associated with green banks. It could be, but it doesn't have to be. And so it can be something other than a loan. It could be a grant that can create rebates or some other type of funding mechanism. But this 7 billion is targeted towards rooftop solar for low income and disadvantaged communities. So this is a big fund. And this one is also, the eligible entities are states, cities, tribal governments, and green banks. And I'm showing a couple of mapping tools here just as a reminder. This is an example of a program. It's clearly oriented towards low income and disadvantaged communities. And so there's a number of mapping tools around. I'm showing the climate and economic justice screening tool on the top, which identifies disadvantaged communities based on a number of different metrics. And then the Green Link equity map I'm showing on the bottom, looking at Atlanta, and I pulled out the income stress indicators. So the darker areas are showing higher income stress. So these types of mapping tools can be key ways to do data analysis within a community process and identify top areas to prioritize with this type of funding, and potentially also to support an application under one of these programs. So with that, we can go to the next slide, and I think I am passing it to Samantha. Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Kenneth. So kind of getting a little more specific on what Kenneth touched on the previous slide, that $8 billion going into greenhouse gas reduction goals for low income or tribal communities, and also that 7 billion of grants going into rooftop solar. So a lot of you are familiar with a few of these things that have already been in place, but with the Inflation Reduction Act, we are seeing an expansion or extending some of the programs that are in there. So one of the most important ones, in my opinion, is the Energy Efficiency Home Improvement Credit. So this is providing $1,200 annually for insulation, energy efficiency, windows and doors, and then $150 in energy audits, and up to $2,000 in electric heat pumps. These credits do not expire, or they don't end within 1 year. So if you have multiple projects over a number of years, you can continue to reach into this credit and get money back for that for years to come. And then a lot of you also may be familiar with the clean energy credit. So right now, that had reduced to about 22% this year, and now it's being expanded again to cover 30% again through at least 2034, and it'll kind of teeter down as the years go on. Projects that have already begun after 2021 and before 2025 can already receive that full credit of 30% if it's under 1 megawatt. And we'll talk about projects that are greater than 1 megawatt in a couple slides. And then the last thing I wanted to highlight was this energy efficiency commercial buildings deduction. So this has also been expanded, but basically what this is it's a energy use intensity per square foot measurement. So the more that commercial buildings are installing energy efficiency, the more credits they're going to get back per square foot. So these are all things that local communities can take advantage of. And right now, I believe the home improvement project is refundable now, and they'll be getting that funding through states. But there's still continuous discussion on how those refunds are going to be allocated either through the state or through communities. I believe there is a 60-day public comment happening right now on how those funds are going to be trickled down from the federal government to states so that local communities can actually take advantage of it. Something else I wanted to touch upon, and this is kind of where we get into projects that are greater than 1 megawatt. So builders of clean energy can take advantage of even more tax credits, depending on which of these bullets they kind of take advantage of. So the IRA is encouraging clean energy projects to be built within energy communities, which I'll further explain in the next couple of slides, and low income communities. So they'll get an extra tax incentive if they were to install solar or wind facilities in these communities. It also incentivizes local job creation within these communities. So they'll get an even larger tax credit if they use apprenticeships. And then it also has a wage requirement. So requiring that they pay people prevailing wages, they'll get an even bigger tax credit for that. So it's really exciting time. We'll take a closer look at how that's going to be done. So projects can get up to a 10% additional incentives if these projects are sited within an energy community. So there are 3 things that define an energy community. There are census tracts with brownfield sites, coal communities, and then census tracts with high unemployment and that use extractive energy jobs to support their local tax revenue. And I'm going to break these down in the next couple of slides. But I did want to say that these are things that we will be putting within GEMS so that users can better identify what an energy community is when they are allocating funds and figuring out where to allocate those funds. So the first thing is a brownfield site. So this is the first thing that categorizes an energy community. A brownfield site, as many of you know, is an area of contaminated land that is eligible for funding to support cleanup and redevelopment by the EPA. So this is going to be really attractive to developers, especially of utility scale solar and energy storage. One of the cons I will say of these brownfield sites is that not all of them are created equal. So some of these sites wouldn't be considered an energy community technically because there is no history of large scale energy development. So if these communities are not equipped for large scale energy development, say there wasn't a previous coal mine or energy production site in this area, they might not be equipped to handle these large projects. So we need to make sure that these communities are equipped. We can't just throw a huge solar farm in an area that's never had any energy development or experience or anything like that, or people who are not prepared. Another type of energy community is a coal community. So these are tracts where coal-fired power plants have been closed since 2010, or a coal mine has been closed since 2000. These brown spots on the map show all the census tracts that qualify. It's around 20% of the total US land area. This is going to be the clearest targeted area within the IRA. So hundreds of coal plants and mines have been shuttered the past 20 years, and the IRA is likely to accelerate the pace of these coal retirements. So there are benefits to these areas. The benefit is that these are going to be entire census tracts as energy communities. And that means that developers will have more flexibility in siting their facilities, and they can also build larger footprint infrastructure, such as utility scale or wind farms. Utility scale wind farms or solar, I'm sorry. There is a potential downside to this, and that is that the geography is very large in some areas. And so projects may be developed hundreds of miles away from these effective coal communities. So for example, because census tracts in rural communities can cover a ton of miles, a wind project developed in southeastern California may do little to support the community that's there, that's hundreds of miles away. So we need to make sure that as these sites are being chosen, they're not just being placed randomly in census tracts where there are no local workforce or local communities to support them. And then the final, most complicated energy community is based on economic status. So There's two contingencies to this. The first is that these areas need to be greater than or equal to 0.17% of direct employment, or greater than or equal to 25% of local tax revenues supported by fossil fuel activities. So they need to be in areas where fossil fuel jobs are prevalent. And there also needs to be, unemployment needs to be at or above the national average from the previous year. So this is great because this is affecting maybe low income communities or communities that are experiencing a decline in jobs from the closing of a fossil fuel plant. But it's also very confusing because unemployment is changing frequently. So the Department of Energy and the Department of Treasury is still deciding on how to better define this, depending on, is this a yearly definition? Is this a monthly definition? They're still working on that. Hopefully it will be cleared up soon. But like I said before, we will be adding the energy communities into GEM as a layer. So this will be super helpful in defining where a great spot to put projects is, especially as we're overlaying different indicators on that map. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was the prevailing wage requirements. So this is applying to projects greater than 1 megawatt. So those projects that are less than 1 megawatt will already qualify for that 30% tax credit for solar or wind facilities. So for instance, a residential home will automatically get that 30%. But if it's greater than 1 megawatt, there are other contingencies to get more tax credit. So they'll start at about 6% of a tax credit, but they can qualify for a full 30% if they ensure that all laborers and mechanics involved in the construction of the project are paid prevailing wages within 5 years after project completion. There will also be a penalty for those who are claiming to pay prevailing wages and don't actually do that. They'll have to pay interest on the money owed to the contractor if they fail to do that. And also projects must ensure that a percentage of total labor hours are performed by a qualified apprenticeship. So they'll get even higher tax credits if they do that. And yeah, let me just make sure. I think that's about it. Yeah. Sorry, there was one more thing I wanted to say, and it's not really related to jobs, but just the credit amount will also be increased to another 10% if certain amount of domestic content is used. So like steel, things that are manufactured in the US, if those are used on projects, you'll get another 10%. So pretty exciting stuff. And I'll pass it back to Kenneth to talk about transportation.
All right, thanks, Samantha. Okay, so I've got a few more pots of money to talk about here. And the first one, like Samantha mentioned, is really focused on transportation access. So it's $3 billion, and it's all about improving walkability, adding affordable transportation options like public transit or enhancing existing transit systems. And then also, and this is a really important point, this funding can go towards transportation planning and capacity building in disadvantaged communities. So that's really neat because part of the funding is there to support community engagement processes themselves. And then 1.3 billion within this program is specifically set aside for areas that meet certain other criteria. So I listed a few of those out here. There are things like if you have an anti-displacement policy in place, you can apply for this 1.3 billion. If you've got a community land trust, if there's a community benefits agreement in place, or let's say you're applying for funding under this program to do a project and your application includes a demonstration of how you're going to employ local residents to do the project. This piece of the program funding is reserved for folks who can meet those criteria. And so this one, like some of the other programs, is open to cities, states, tribal governments. It's also open to transit agencies and MPOs, metropolitan planning organizations, which are sort of the regional transportation planning groups. So let's see, go to the next slide. Okay, now this program is focused on climate and health risks, reducing those to the benefit of disadvantaged communities. So this one is $3 billion for things like reducing indoor air pollution, mitigating urban heat islands, promoting climate resilience. So any kind of program or technology that can achieve those benefits in a disadvantaged community, you could apply under this program for funding. And this one, similar to the transportation fund, also has a workforce development component. And it has a part of the funding is meant to facilitate engagement of disadvantaged communities in planning processes. So again, this one is another one with funding specifically for community engagement. So that's really great. And one of the other unique elements of this particular program is the eligible entity here is CBOs. And there can also be partnerships between a CBO and a city, or there's several partnerships that are eligible to apply for funds under this program, but they're all partnerships with community-based organizations. So that's unique to this particular program. And I put up another GreenLink equity map shot here where I looked at Memphis, and I put on the urban heat island indicator and then also energy burden. And so the yellow, for example, is showing where both of those things are high. So the yellow tracks are showing you've got a high heat island, and you've also got severe energy burden. So, that's where you might want to target some of these program funds. And again, this is something you could potentially use in an application for funding under this program. And let me call out too, while I'm here, Roberto Guzman had a good question in the chat that I wrote back about, asking about funding timelines and availability. And so I'll just say for all of these programs that I've talked about, the timelines are different. So there's not a short answer to when they are, but most of them start either 180 or 270 days after enactment of the IRA, which translates to mid-February 23 or mid-May 23, respectively. But these are also they're all programs that have to be developed, right? These are all things that are ultimately going to be offered by the EPA, the Department of Energy, Federal Highway Administration, other federal agencies. And so the programs have to be developed, and that is what's happening right now. Those agencies are working to put them together. And so there's not highly specific timeline information right now, but first half of 23 is sort of a general picture of when this funding starts. And it's also important to keep our eye on how long the funding is available, because that varies as well across the programs. Some of them, the funding goes through 2024. Some of them it goes through 26 or even a lot later than that. So in terms of thinking about applications under these programs for funding, that's going to be an important point. So thank you, Roberto, for asking that great question. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. I think we got one more. Okay, yeah, so this one is about energy efficiency. So this is $4 billion for home efficiency rebates. And this one is one that state energy offices apply to. And then they would receive money if they're awarded for their applications. And the state energy office, then would administer the funds and actually distribute the rebates. And so the rebates, they go to both single family and multifamily homes, which is great. It's a significant rebate per home, as you can see on the slide. But then also low and moderate income homes can have a higher rebate as determined by the state energy office in their program. And then this is another one where part of the funding is there for workforce development. So part of it is there to help communities, give community members a way to get trained so that they can then get the jobs and provide the work that ultimately does these energy efficiency retrofits. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So just coming full circle and summarizing what myself and Samantha talked about. Again, we talked about a number of different programs and incentives, lots of different job creation opportunities here, lots of different opportunities for community bill savings, to reduce pollution in communities, to promote transportation access. And there's a lot of flexibility. Communities can design programs and policies that make sense for them, and apply for funding under the IRA. And again, our takeaway, these benefits are things that we can unlock if we're proactive about it, and if we get together as communities, ensure that we are maximizing benefits for folks by centering the community in the planning and implementation efforts. And so that is what we wanted to share on the IRA. Thank you all again for being with us, and I will pass it back to Daniel.
All right. Thank you once again to both of y'all for all of that. Really great information. What I'm going to show you is how GEM itself can help identify areas that are most in need of these sorts of funds. So give me 1 second. Okay, everyone seeing what I'm seeing? So we're showing the city of Atlanta, and the reason we're showing it is we have been working there conducting town hall meetings with our local community-based organization partners to find out what factors are most important to residents in underserved communities. And while this is still a work in progress, we've been able to identify certain factors that were most important and then weigh them based on the surveys that were conducted. So what we're able to look at is areas of Atlanta now that are more equitable or less equitable. You'll notice in the north of Atlanta, they're in pretty good shape. Very high equitable, probably doesn't need as much help, as opposed to when you get towards the central and south central of the city, the numbers go drastically down. These are more impoverished areas. They really could use the help that these funds are set up for. Conversely, if we wanted to, we can also look at the indicators of energy burden and racial composition. And if we start looking, we'll see the trends in certain census tracts that areas that have a high African-American population generally have a higher energy burden. So when looking for those equity mixes, these are some of the factors that you can look at within GEM to help you determine with your funds how best to allocate them so that the right folks are getting the right amount of help, as opposed to maybe areas that would not be as beneficial for them. And with that, I believe we could open this up to any questions or comments that we may have. If anybody would like to share on that. Or I believe maybe Kenneth answered all the questions in the chat.
Daniel, this is Forrest with the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. I was typing one in and I've taken too long to get it through. So if I could just ask, a moment ago, there was the overview of the $4 billion for energy efficiency. Was that referring specifically to the homes program or something different?
That's exactly right, Forrest. Yeah, good question. That was the homes program.
And those funds, I had the impression that those were a formula allocation to states, but is it a competitive application for funds, or are those going to flow to states following a prescribed formula?
My understanding is it's based on state applications, and any funding left over after applications have been received is ultimately going to be able to flow to the states that did start programs.
Okay, so maybe it's a bit of both. So states would have to apply for it. It sounds like perhaps the first round may not be competitive, but unallocated funds, if not sought by some states, would be potentially available for other states to get, that we're moving forward with programs.
That's
a scary thought. It's a scary thought to me in the South. God, I hope the states will apply and pull the funds down, because what a travesty if not. Okay,
absolutely.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yep.
All right, any other questions that folks would like to bring up real quick while we've got these two with us? Feel free to walk on up to the microphone. Okay, well, if we don't have any other questions, we can go ahead and let you know that once again, we will be having our next community of practice on the 17th. And I just placed into the chat a link to our survey, or I will be placing it into the chat. If you could, when you get a chance to take it, let us know how we can best improve these events. Also, how best to improve GEM as a whole, the experience. And if you need any assistance with programs, feel free to book a demo with us. We'd be always glad to help you out. And thank you again to Samantha and Kenneth. Thank you to Mina for helping with the chat and getting everyone in there. And we will be very hopeful to see y'all again next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the time back. Take care, everyone.